Introduction: when agency ends without a decision by the parties. In the previous section, we examined how agency relationships may terminate through the actions of the parties themselves, including mutual consent, cancellation by the principal, or withdrawal by the agent. However, agency relationships do not always end because someone decides to terminate them. In many situations, the agency relationship ends automatically due to circumstances outside the control of the parties. These situations are known as termination by operation of law. Termination by operation of law occurs when a legal event takes place that makes continuation of the agency relationship impossible or unnecessary. These events may include the expiration of the agency agreement, the death or incapacity of a party, the destruction of the property that is the subject of the agency, or the successful completion of the transaction objective. Understanding these events is important for real estate professionals because they affect when fiduciary duties begin and end. Agents must also understand when their authority to act on behalf of a client ceases, so they do not continue performing activities that exceed their legal authority. In Arizona real estate practice, recognizing these events ensures that agents remain compliant with the professional conduct rules under AAC R428 and the statutory framework established within Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 32, Chapter 20. A. Expiration. One of the most common forms of termination by operation of law is expiration of the agency agreement. Most real estate brokerage agreements include a defined time period during which the agent is authorized to represent the client. Once that time period ends, the agency relationship automatically terminates unless the parties choose to extend the agreement. For example, a listing agreement for a property in Gilbert may authorize the brokerage to market the property for a period of 6 months. If the property has not sold by the end of that 6-month period and the agreement is not renewed, the agency relationship ends automatically. At that point, the broker no longer has authority to act on behalf of the seller. Expiration protects both the client and the brokerage by ensuring that representation agreements do not continue indefinitely without the client's consent. Agents should always monitor expiration dates carefully and communicate with clients before the agreement expires to determine whether the client wishes to renew the relationship. B. Incapacity or death. Another event that may terminate an agency relationship by operation of law is the death or incapacity of either the principal or the agent. Because agency relationships rely on the legal authority granted by the principal, that authority typically ends when the principal dies or becomes legally incapacitated. For example, if a seller in Scottsdale signs a listing agreement with a brokerage and then passes away before the property sells, the agency relationship generally terminates immediately upon the seller's death. The agent no longer has authority to act on behalf of the deceased principal unless a legally authorized representative of the estate establishes a new agreement. Similarly, if an agent becomes incapacitated and can no longer perform their duties, the brokerage must ensure that the client's interests are protected and that representation continues under appropriate supervision. These situations often require coordination with attorneys, estate representatives, or other professionals to ensure that the transaction proceeds in compliance with applicable laws. C. Destruction or condemnation. Agency relationships may also terminate when the subject property of the transaction is destroyed or condemned. Real estate agency agreements typically focus on a specific property that the agent is authorized to market, sell, or help the client purchase. If that property is destroyed or taken through condemnation by a government authority, the objective of the agency relationship may no longer exist. For example, imagine a home in Phoenix listed for sale when a fire severely damages the structure. If the property becomes uninhabitable or is declared unsafe by local authorities, the listing agreement may terminate because the property being marketed no longer exists in its original condition. Similarly, if a government entity condemns property for public use, such as for a highway expansion project, the agency relationship may terminate because the property can no longer be transferred through a typical real estate transaction. In these situations, agents should communicate with the client and document the circumstances surrounding the termination. D. Achievement of agency objective. The final form of termination by operation of law occurs when the objective of the agency relationship has been successfully achieved. In real estate transactions, the primary objective of the agency relationship is typically the completion of the purchase or sale of a property. Once the transaction closes and ownership transfers, the agency relationship generally ends. For example, if a buyer's agent assists a client in purchasing a home in Mesa and the transaction successfully closes through escrow, the agency relationship has fulfilled its purpose. While certain responsibilities may continue after closing, such as maintaining confidentiality or providing records, the authority of the agent to act on behalf of the client in that specific transaction usually ends. Recognizing when the agency objective has been achieved helps agents transition the relationship from active representation to post-transaction support while maintaining professional boundaries. Discussion questions. Why does expiration of a listing agreement automatically terminate an agency relationship? Answer: because the agreement only authorizes the agent to represent the client for a specific period of time. How can the death of a principal affect a real estate agency relationship? Answer: because the agent's authority comes from the principal, and that authority generally ends when the principal dies. Why does the successful closing of a transaction typically terminate the agency relationship? Answer: because the primary objective of the agency relationship has been completed.